Help support Name Explain by liking this video, leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel. In the Caribbean Sea we have two nations. Well, I mean there's a fair few others too, but for the sake of this video we are looking at just two of them. These are of course the nations of the Dominican Republic and Dominica, and you don't need to look too hard as to see why these two names are of so much interest to us. They're identical minus the N and the Republic at the end of the Dominican Republic. It's not only their names that are close together, but the nations are close together geographically too, both being in the archipelago of the Antilles, specifically the Greater and Lesser Antilles for the Dominican Republic and Dominica respectively. How this name came about is somewhat unknown however. Some believe it comes from the Gaelic An Antiella, which means waterland, while others like to argue that the name links to Plato's fictional island of Atlas, known today as Atlantis. Dominica is a completely separate island nation in the Caribbean, while the Dominican Republic is the eastern part of the larger island of Hispaniola, with the separate nation of Haiti on the eastern side of this island. And we will look into the name for this island as a whole in a bit. And while their names are similar, there's a name they share which are exactly the same, that being the name for the people who live there. People from the Dominican Republic are called Dominicans, and people from Dominica are also called Dominicans, which is just a little bit confusing. However, one source I read told me that while these names look the same, they're actually pronounced differently. With Dominicans from the Dominican Republic, the me syllable is stressed, while Dominicans from Dominica, the ni syllable is stressed, Dominica and Dominica respectively. Yet despite the similarities in the name for these lands and the name for their people, there are many differences between them. The sort of things that differentiate most countries. They have different official languages, with Spanish being the official language of the Dominican Republic and English being the official language of Dominica, along with a variation of French called Dominican Creole French, hence why the name is said with something of a French accent to it, and not said as a Dominica as I would have been tempted to say if I didn't check beforehand. Their populations are vastly different, with the Dominican Republic having over 10 million people, while Dominica has just over 70,000. The nations are vastly different in size, with different currencies and ethnic groups. And of course one of the biggest differences in the nation being their names. Despite how similar their names are, there's the whole additional word of republic added to the Dominican Republic, and conversely with Dominica, its full name is actually the Commonwealth of Dominica. So what makes one a republic and one a commonwealth? Dominica is called a commonwealth because it was once part of the British Empire, and now a lot of the nations that were part of this empire are now part of a new collection of nations called the Commonwealth, while a republic is defined as a government or state whose leader is not part of a monarchy, and the people of the nation are entitled to vote. The Dominican Republic fits this bill, so the name makes sense. Though Dominica does also have elections, prime minister and president, so it fits the bill as a republic too. I guess the importance of it being part of the Commonwealth becomes before it being a republic. So that may be the differences between these nations and the key differences in their names. However, we aren't interested in differences here on Name Explain. We want to know about similarities. So how did these nations end up with these names? And are there any connections between the two? To start off, let's look into the history of the Dominican Republic. While of course the lands of the Dominican Republic were inhabited by natives first, it would make more sense for us to start this story in 1492. It was in this year the island was first visited by Europeans, and by Europeans I mean none other than Mr. Christopher Columbus himself. It was he who gave this island as a whole the name of Hispaniola. This name comes from the unsurprisingly Spanish La Isla Española, which I have read from different sources to mean either the Spanish island or Little Spain. Regardless of whichever one of these names are correct, we can see in this name the importance Columbus and the Spanish put on the island, naming it directly after their homelands. And there is a key reason for this, and that's because this was the first land in North America settled by the Spanish, and for a while it would become their hub of operation for controlling and overseeing the rest of their conquest for the Americas. And because of this, they needed a city on the island to work out of. This came 4 years after Columbus found the island in 1496, and this city was founded by Columbus. Not Christopher however, but rather Bartholomew Columbus, Christopher's younger brother. This city was named Santo Domingo, a name we'll get into later, and this city grew and grew, like I said, becoming the hub of the Spanish conquest, and Santo Domingo to this day is still the capital of the nation. As the Spanish explored more of the New World, other European nations wanted a slice of this American pie. In the case of the island of Hispaniola, it was the French. They set up a colony on the western side of the island, and with this came anger between the two nations of France and Spain over the claim to the island. However, this came to a head in 1697 with the Treaty of Ryswick, named after the Dutch city of Ryswick where it was signed, that split the island between the French and the Spanish. The western French side of the island became Haiti, run by the French, while the eastern Spanish side of the island became known as a whole by the name of its largest city, Santo Domingo. This led to the end of the completely Spanish-ruled Hispaniola, and while that name still exists, it is only used as a geographic term for the island as a whole, and I don't believe it holds any political power or anything like that. And this is how things stayed on the island all the way until 1795, when Spain ceded their part of the island to the French, yet by 1808 it would be taken over by the Spanish yet again. Then from 1822 to 1844, Haiti and Santo Domingo would reunify. However, it would be in 1844 that the Santo Domingo part of the nation would become independent for the first time, and it was here for the first time they took on the name the Dominican Republic. And from here the nation has been once again taken by the Spanish, occupied by the USA, and of course once again become independent. However, for the sake of the name Dominican Republic, we can probably wrap things up here. So what about that name Dominican Republic? Well, as we mentioned, this name for the nation as a whole is a variation of the capital's name, Santo Domingo. So what we really need to look into is how this city got this name. Well, just looking at this name can give us a pretty clear idea. Many places in the Caribbean are named after saints, and this one is no exception. You don't even need to be fluent in Spanish to look at this name and see that it translates into Saint Dominic, who is unsurprisingly the patron saint of the Dominican Republic. He is also the founder of the Dominican Order, an order that promoted a life of simplicity in Christianity in 1216. So the Dominican Republic was named after the city of Santo Domingo, which was named after Saint Dominic. So how did Saint Dominic get his name? The name Dominic comes from the Latin Dominicus, which literally translates to pertaining to the Lord, so it makes sense that a saint would have this name. This roots back further to the Latin Dominus, which means Lord/Master, and this is the same root that Sunday, considered the holy day for Christians, gets its name in Latin, with Sunday's name in Latin being Dominica. And that brings us nicely to the next nation we'll be looking into today, the small island nation of Dominica, which shares its name exactly with the Latin word for Sunday. And this nation isn't named after Saint Dominic this time. The story goes that Columbus, Christopher once again this time, sailed past the island on the 3rd of November 1493, which of course was a Sunday. So in celebration of finding this island on a Sunday, he named it after the holiest of days, but obviously in Latin. If it was just named Sunday Island, that would be tantalizing. And unlike Hispaniola/Santo Domingo/the Dominican Republic, this name hasn't changed, and Dominica has been the name for this island since. Despite finding the island, the Spanish actually didn't have much success with colonizing it. Instead, it was the French who had success taking over it first. They held on to the island from 1715 till 1763. However, the island got caught up in the 7-Year War, a massive war which was fought from 1756 to 1763 that spanned a lot of the globe and was battled between the British and French, each with allied kingdoms and empires on their sides. It was eventually won by the British, and when the Treaty of Paris was signed, the island of Dominica was handed over to the British. It was under British rule that English started to become the main language of the island as it is today, and as part of the British Empire it would remain, all the way up until 1978 when the nation gained independence from the Brits. However, as we saw in its name, the nation is still part of the Commonwealth, along with many other former British Empire nations. So what connects these two nations' names? Well, weirdly enough, it seems to be Sunday, which really isn't what I expected going into this video. Dominica is literally named after Sunday, and so is the Dominican Republic, albeit via Saint Dominic and his order, whose name shares etymological ties with the Latin word for Sunday. But it does make sense in a weird way. They were both named by Columbuses, and they were a deeply religious family. Sunday is a deeply religious day, so it seems fitting. I can't imagine Dominica would have got this name if it was spotted on any other day of the week. Hump Day Island just doesn't sound as nice. However, despite the similarities in their names and the shared history of Columbus and the French, it seems that their names being similar is just another coincidence of language, one being named after a day and one being named after a person who would go on to be their patron saint. Not, however, their Patreon saint, as the Dominican Republic and Dominica was suggested by Mabel Athena, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of the Dominican Republic and Dominica. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that's name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Name Explain depends on small monthly donations from fans like you to help keep the channel running. Just a small amount of $2 a month helps in a huge way, grants you patron exclusive Name Explain extras, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you.